Like many Canadians this time of year, I'm enjoying the woods. And recently, Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston declared the woods to be off limits due to fire risk, providing a handy snitch line for those of a certain curtain-twitching disposition. Over the following days, other maritime provinces appear to be taking a similar approach. Who knows, soon I might not be able to be in these woods in Ontario in the near future. While most appear to support the fines of $25,000 for Nova Scotians who defy the ban, others are fighting back. Today I'm joined by retired veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, Jeff Everly, who tested Premier Tim Houston's fire ban with a video that has since gone viral. And joining us is retired forestry technician Peter MacIsaac, with decades of experience in both firefighting and fire management in Nova Scotia. Is this ban on travel constitutional? Let's find out. I'm Melanie Bennet. This is Disrupted. I am currently in the woods. You can't see it right now, but I am in the woods. And my guest here, Jeff Everly, has had some experience recently with being in the woods. Is that right, Jeff?
Yes, that is absolutely right. I received a $28,872.50 fine for going into the woods in Nova Scotia. And by the way, Nova Scotia is the woods.
And Peter, thank you for joining us as well. You have some particular experience with the woods.
Yeah, actually, I was for 29 years a professional forest fighter for the province of Nova Scotia and / firefighter game warden. So we didn't fight many fires down here in the winter. But for my entire career, I was involved in fires. I was incident commander on probably over 100 fires, and I've fought fires all across Nova Scotia and in Alberta.
And so right now, just as of yesterday, I think it was, or possibly this morning, I saw there were some fire bombers in Nova Scotia fighting those fires that are raging right now. Do we think that any of those fires might have been caused by people walking in the woods?
I saw a report last night where categorically they claim initially that it was started by someone splitting rocks or working with a piece of equipment next to the woods. And I believe it may have been on a construction site, which means they probably would have had to have a permit with conditions on the permit that they should have had firefighting equipment. How that one happened is beyond me, but people need to know that Nova Scotia has legislation that if you start a fire, you can be billed for the entire cost of the suppression effort. And in this one, it's going to be very expensive for the people who lit this one.
I mean, joking aside, this is a serious matter. Everything is very dry. The country is at risk of fires all over the place. And so the province has decided to take some rather authoritarian or all-sweeping methods to potentially prevent these fires. And interestingly, I came across some data researching for this chat that we're going to have about what the sources of these fires were. Why we would stop people from entering the woods to prevent fires. And as it turns out, arson is the #1 cause of fires in Nova Scotia between 2007 and 2023, with a grand total of 1,144 fires caused by arson, and the second largest is debris fires at 580. So, and on this particular graph, it doesn't mention any fires being caused by anyone walking in the woods. And so it's really interesting, Jeff, that you decided to then go take a walk in the woods and test the fines that they were putting out. I believe it's $25,000 for anyone walking in the woods. Why would you stop people from walking in the woods?
I think what we're seeing is something like the paternalism of the guilty mind that is central to the essence of totalitarianism on full display in the Atlantic provinces. We're living through a management crisis where the one thing that nobody seems to be doing anymore is managing. And as Peter alluded to there, our forests in Nova Scotia are no difference. We have deadfall down everywhere still from the last hurricane that blew through here that never got cleaned up, and limitations on our citizens with respect to how much of that deadwood they can collect for the purpose of heating their homes. So there are any number of things that they could have been doing in terms of prevention leading up to this, and now we're in this situation where like a wildfire would be catastrophic because of all this deadfall, but their failure to plan constitutes an emergency on the part of the rest of us. So I find that to be totally unacceptable. These people are put in these positions of power, of management, for the purpose of managing crises and facilitating the lives of their citizens, and they're doing the opposite. They're not managing, and they're burdening us with additional hardships to make up for their own failures. And by the way, it's like a mass conscription exercise all over again, just like it was in COVID, where everybody in the province is conscripted to provide labor free of charge for Tim Houston's effort. So I find that it's kind of like a degree of slavery at the same time, and the whole thing is pretty dehumanizing because I mentioned the paternalism in all of it, and I saw the New Brunswick Premier there yesterday who contradicted Tim Houston and said that no, the reason you're not allowed in the woods is not because walking causes fire, but because we're fighting fires, and you need your hand held because you'll break your leg without us. And, they'll have to come rescue you, but they can't do that because they have all the resources dedicated to fighting fire. So, and my comment was, so Nova Scotians are fire hazards, New Brunswickers are klutzes. Both of us need our hands held, and that is the paternalism of the guilty mind that is, I think, central to totalitarian thinking on full display for the rest of us right now.
And Peter, you have quite significant experience fighting fires as well. Is that correct?
Correct. I've actually been incident commander on probably over 100 fires. I've been on fires as big as, from 1 acre up to, or half an acre up to 60,000 acre fires. And in 2023, Nova Scotia had its largest fire in its history, a little over 60,000 acres, and that cause of that fire was arson, as you've already mentioned.
Yeah, so this is pretty unheard of, to ban people from being present in the forest during a fire season. But from what I understand too, that doesn't necessarily apply to Indigenous land or Crown land. Is that right? So
No, it applies to
provincial land.
Crown. Well, it does apply to Crown land, but it doesn't apply to. It's a partial application to private lands. So under this government decree, you can actually walk on your own land in the woods, but you can't have anybody with you who's not a landowner. So you can walk, apparently safely, and the person beside you will get fined $28,872.50, which Jeff can attest to. Mm-hmm. So when you look at proportionality...
But it doesn't apply to Indigenous land?
No, it doesn't.
So...
Straight up.
Yeah, I just find that quite curious, because it seems to be saying that in certain conditions, on certain terrain, you could potentially cause a fire by your presence, but not on other lands, and it doesn't seem like it's particularly well thought out. So that points to me that there might be a management issue here. So not just a forest management issue, but perhaps even just a general political management issue. But I want to go back to land management for a bit, because what would be the changes in forest management that will require such a sweeping ban of people being present in forest land?
Well, I can give you some information. Beginning in, I think, around 2005, 2006 in Nova Scotia, every district office for Department of Natural Resources had 5-man fire crews in the summer, and they got cut back to 3. And then in 2012, we had a rapid response helitack team. So they're the best of the best firefighters that the province had. And they were positioned in the center of the province at fire control with a Bell 212 helicopter. And when a fire got called in, if conditions were extremely bad and it was in a remote area at all, that we would call helitack, and they would be in the air within 15 minutes. And in many cases, they would be our rapid response team and first people on the fire. They would start a fire attack, and then the biggest helicopter the province had at the time would start dropping water. I've seen cases where they were on the fire battling it for 1 to 2 hours before ground crews were even able to get there. And so what those guys did was they kept fires at 3 to 4 acres rather than turning into 30 to 40,000 acre fires. So those guys got disbanded. That big helicopter got sold. We bought new helicopters that don't have the same lifting capacity, and none of them are big enough to be able to transport a helitack team. And then the province also dismantled our entire fire tower system that was our early warning system for the province. And this relates heavily to what I'm about to tell you. When they shut down that entire system, the justification was that with the advent of everybody having cell phones on their person, that they would be the new early warning system from one end of the province to the other, and the province would rely on those people calling in and reporting fires, and as a result of that, we no longer needed the tower system. And the Premier thought it was wise to put all of those people out of the woods, and anybody that's in the woods, even with a travel permit, they're restricted from having a smartwatch or a cell phone. So this is not about protecting the woods from fire.
Yeah, so to be clear, there were towers, and those towers were detecting fires. They were manned towers, is that right? So people actually in the towers checking for these fires. No longer, the towers are now gone, expecting people with cell phones, relying on people with cell phones to contact emergency services about these fires. And now these people aren't even allowed in the woods.
Correct, 100%. So what happens is it's nonsensical. It just flat out doesn't make sense. The people of Nova Scotia, for example, need to realize that there is no monitoring system right now in any remote areas in the province for fires, and I haven't seen any indication that they're running single pilot aircraft, which would be aerial monitoring from one end of the province to the other, which what should be happening, and I haven't seen any indication that that's actually happening. And so what's happened is the province has entirely dropped the ball, and after the big Jasper fires, the federal government made money available, and the province ordered 4 new helicopters. And instead of ordering one with helitack capabilities, they ordered 4 of what we already had. And it's nonsensical.
Yeah, so not only putting, essentially creating a situation that would make the fires worse should they happen by removing the towers and banning people with cell phones to be able to report on these fires, but there's another concern, which is a freedom of movement concern, because as far as I understand, the Canadian Charter of Rights does have within it a freedom of movement. People are supposed to be allowed to move freely. Now, there are restrictions, and one of those restrictions was challenged, I believe, in Nova Scotia during the pandemic or around the pandemic time, where that freedom of movement could be limited by things like public health was one of them. But as far as I understand, that case was won for the freedom of movement. So people should have freedom of movement in this country based in charter rights. And so, Jeff, I'll turn it to you. Is that what you're trying to challenge right now?
Yes, absolutely. And what you're talking about in terms of limitations, they must be reasonable. They cannot be arbitrary. That is the difference between totalitarianism and our society. So when it comes to any measures that they put in place that interfere with my liberties, they need to be minimally impairing. And there was no effort to make these measures minimally impairing with respect to my liberties whatsoever. They went all the way to a full-scale woods ban of my presence, period, within the woods, instead of taking any other steps leading up to that, like, say, for example, they could ban smoking in the woods, they could ban, like, any source of ignition from the woods if they wanted. But like I said, there appears to have been no thought given to lesser measures that would be less impairing prior to going straight to a woods ban. So that is the issue with respect to the limitations, and also those limitations must be logically connected to the goal. In this case, the goal is preventing wildfires. My sneakers are not a fire hazard, so there's no logical connection between my sneakers in the woods and the prevention of wildfires. So that's what I find to be so unconstitutional on its face in terms of the ban itself. And then we get into the fine, which is, like Peter just mentioned, it's a $28,872.50 fine grand total, because they put victim fees on top of that, $25,000 initially, and that would be, I think, prohibited under Section 12 of the Charter that prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. So I think we have plenty of grounds, charter grounds, on which to stand to challenge this ban.
Yeah. So, what would you hope to see, Jeff, as a positive outcome for this ticket?
I think I would like to see our leaders show some respect for our rights and our freedoms, especially in light of the fact that they are so hard won, and so many Canadians have paid the ultimate sacrifice for the rest of us. And having had my experience in the military, and particularly in Afghanistan, I saw more young Canadians loaded into the back of a Hercules in a flag-draped coffin than potentially any other living Canadian. So I have some sense of what it really takes to win these freedoms, especially once they're lost, and to see our political and our public service leadership wiping their asses with the legacy of our fallen the way that they have been over the last several years, I think is a gross indignity to veterans and an affront to human dignity more broadly. So I would like to see some respect come back in that regard. They don't respect their citizens and they don't respect veterans. Also I think on the legal front, they're standing on Section 25(1) of the Forests Act that says the minister may prohibit anybody from entering any part of the woods at any time, which I took to mean within, there are limitations on that within the confines of the Constitution, but it didn't seem to be the position that the Crown was taking. So if that's the case, then perhaps the Forests Act should be declared ultra vires and rewritten. I would like to see them write some metrics into the law with respect to how they're going to impose these measures in the future. I think, in my amateur assessment, that we use the weather fire index to make these determinations. So just tie the measures, escalating measures, to an elevating weather fire index and say, at this stage, we're going to impose these measures, and at that stage, it's these measures that come into place. There should be as little wiggle room for judgment on the part of my fellow primates as possible written into the law, because, as you can see, we can't rely on them to exercise good judgment.
So that raises a really interesting question for you, Peter. If there's no standardization within the fire weather index, how are these decisions being made?
Well, the fire weather index system, which is used all across North America and was put in place in 1970, that is the bar, and the Premier completely ignored the bar. I'll give you an example. When the fire ban was first put in place, 40% of the province was in low to moderate. It's completely unheard of. So what happened is the Premier is exhibiting signs of, I'm no doctor, but PTSD, because he's telling his MLAs that he can't sleep at night. He's haunted by the fact he sat with people when their homes were burning and would they find charred bodies in the remains, and apparently the fact that no one's ever died in a forest fire in Nova Scotia is irrelevant. But he made that decision and completely skipped over the hard data, and I have to agree with Jeff 100%. The issue being is it has to be someone other than a politician who sets that actual framework as to when they can call an emergency, because if you allow them to set that, they're going to set it fairly low. So even when the travel ban was put in, I believe there was 13 out of 31 areas that weren't in extreme. And as Jeff pointed out, the province, when they make these bans in accordance with the charter, they have to use the less invasive means as possible, and they have to have accommodation. I heard from Brian Peckford last night, and he's the last living signatory to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And he pointed out to me that this probably won't even make it to the Oaks test on a charter challenge, that Jeff's case will probably be won just on the fact of the lack of proportionality. And proportionality is already baked into that fire weather index, and the Premier completely ignored it. And I heard people on talk radio today saying, well, these guys are experts, but they don't understand how things work in the province of Nova Scotia. The Premier makes a decision. He tells his minister what he wants done. The minister contacts the deputy minister, who contacts a senior director, who contacts a manager, and says, here's what you're going to do. Here's what the Premier wants done. Now find a way to justify it. And unfortunately, they can't justify it because people myself know how to read all the fire weather indices because I worked with them for 29 years. And the data is the data, and it can't be screwed with. Even though the Premier is running a full-on fear campaign, and I'm watching probably 60% of Nova Scotians that are making comments on social media and on talk radio, for example, and they're all based on fear. I've seen comments from people living in downtown Halifax where they're worried that their house is going to burn down and they're living in a 20-story apartment.
Yeah, well, that might be the case. This particular charter challenge, I'm going to be watching it closely. And obviously, another Nova Scotian had the previous challenge to the COVID travel ban. So that would be 2 wins if you win, Jeff. So not all is lost, even though most people seem to want to comply, as they say. But I really appreciate your time today and explaining this situation to me. So thank you, Peter and Jeff.
My pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
For now, I'll keep enjoying the woods here in Ontario. Thankfully, last night we did have a rainstorm, so perhaps we'll avoid a climate travel ban altogether, which would be nice. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and join me next week here on Disrupted.